by the nature of the thing, if you're not an expert in something, it's very hard to know what questions to ask. A really strong way is to ask them to make predictions. If you are an expert in something, then to some degree, you should be able to predict how that thing will behave. Someone says homeopathy makes you better. I was like, okay, if homeopathy makes you better, you should predict that people will get better on homeopathy than they do on placebo. Let's tie you to that. And they say, oh, well, it doesn't, you can't make predictions like that, doesn't work. And so I think that when you're shying away from making confident predictions about the future, that's a good test for expert versus non-expert.
Tom Chivers, author and science editor at UnHerd. Carneesperta. My name is Bis, B-I-S. I'm a journalist from the world of artificial machines with the goal of investigating human natural intelligence. 1. Tell me an example of human intelligence happening.
I'll give a very specific example is that at the moment we're struggling with my daughter to get her to go into school because she's very stubborn and she refuses, and we have to find ways of persuading her to get in the morning because she'll dig in her heels, and that is a complicated situation. We're trying to solve the problem of her doing what she needs to do, and she's trying to solve the problem of not wanting to do the things she doesn't want to do. So we've got competing goals, and we have to try and navigate around them. That involves solving this sort of complex multiplayer game, like game theory. We have to try and model how her brain works, and she has to try and to be honest, all she has to do is just say, I'm not doing it. We are trying to sort of work out ways in which we can work around the stubbornness, and we will say things like, we'll give you reward charts, and we'll give you bribes, or we'll try and make her feel like it's her idea, or all this sort of stuff. This is a very human thing we're trying to do. We're trying to model and understand another agent, and then trying to sort of guide its behavior, her behavior, so that it into the way that we want it to go. It is not a simple maths way. It is modeling a human brain in our brain and trying to predict its behaviors and work out the levers to pull to make it act in the way you want.
2. Tell me an example of a lack of human intelligence happening.
It's a complicated one because, the examples people want to talk about is things like confirmation bias and all these things. So the obvious example would be things like people believing conspiracy theories or not believing in climate change, believing in climate change skepticism. But I don't think it's as straightforward as that. I think often they are behaving rationally. Their beliefs and intelligence can do different things. Like if I am a farmer, it's really important for me to be able to predict the climate and to know when the best time to plant crops at certain times of the year and all that sort of stuff. So it really matters to me whether the climate has changed in some noticeable way. But if I'm just some guy in Dakota, the actions of the climate aren't super important to my daily life. But what is important is my social interactions, and it might really matter to me that I signal that I'm not part of the tribe that believes in climate change, so that my friends and social grouping accept me, and that is more important, has more impact on my life than whether or not I correctly believe that the world is 1.5 degrees warmer or half degree warmer or whatever. So the belief then is doing a different job. It's not telling me helping me to navigate the world by telling me true facts. It's signaling group membership, and that is might be a perfectly rational thing to do from sort of optimizing behavior sort of way. When human intelligence isn't working or isn't happening is when that gets in the way, when someone signals their group when these two modes get mixed up, or when someone signals membership uses a belief that signals membership, like vaccines don't work, and then die of COVID. Human intelligence has failed in some way. But even then, I get, that's outcome bias, isn't it? You're saying, I'm looking at the outcome and saying, well, you died of COVID, but maybe the bet was a good one, and if I did it 1 million times, I would get more benefit from signaling my group membership than from occasionally dying of COVID. So it's a tricky one. If I write a piece and let's say it's read by 10,000 people, then I can't possibly expect that all 10,000 people will understand everything I say, even if I write it perfectly. So I can feel I've done a pretty good job, and still people have misunderstood what I've been saying, and I've made it as, you take a complex topic, you make it as simple as you can, but not too simple, but no simpler, right? That's the saying. That said, sometimes I get it wrong and I don't do a good enough job. And normally the editors will pick, because the editors are non-specialists, so they'll pick it up, and they'll say, well, I don't understand this, you haven't talked me through, and hopefully we'll catch most of it. But yeah, it is a sliding scale. It is either my fault or their fault. It is, out of the thousands of people who will read it, what percentage will understand it? Have I done the best reasonable job I could of trying to explain it? I think I'm pretty good at it by the standard of people doing my job. But yeah, sometimes I do better and sometimes I do worse jobs. And sometimes I come up with the perfect metaphor for explaining it. And sometimes I don't. And sometimes it's all a bit labored and sometimes it's just a really complicated thing.
3. Definition of intelligence.
It's very hard to boil down and people spend lifetimes arguing about it. I think ability to solve problems and achieve goals is a lot of it. I think also you can do a reasonable job by pointing, there is a thing, an ability to solve problems or an ability to reason about the world that a human has more than a chimpanzee, and a chimpanzee has more than a mouse, and a mouse has more than a bacterium, and a bacterium has more than a stone, and there is something different that we all agree is real there. And you could spend ages sort of arguing over, featherless biped style definitions, but actually we can all we can define it by extension and say, there is this thing that is better at solving problems in the world, and there is this thing which is worse, and this has more of the stuff that we call intelligence. And if you don't want to call it intelligence, call it optimizing power or rationality or whatever, and that's fine, call it that. But I think we can point towards the ability to achieve complex goals in the world and to solve problems, to get past, get around things. So I think then that would be my definition. It's loose and it's sort of flabby, but people all know what you're talking about. It is just that it's very hard to tie down into a specific definition, because you can always find counterexamples. It's like the family resemblance thing. What is a game? Right, and well, is it a game where you play against someone? Well, no, because solitaire is a game, you play it on your own. Is it a thing that you enjoy playing? Well, not everyone enjoys playing them, but it's still a game. It's the family resemblance thing, I think, with intelligence. So there is just the ability to solve problems, and you know it when you see it. Distinguishing between the narrowness of a human intelligence and the narrowness of an AI, because an AI can tell the difference between cats and dogs, images of cats and dogs, image recognition, or even like something more sophisticated like AlphaGo or AlphaZero, that can do these amazing things, like it can learn to play chess and then learn to play Go and then learn to play, and it's broad by the standards of AI, general by the standards of AI. It's still fantastically narrow by the standards of human. Even the narrowest, even some guy who's a savant type who's amazing at maths is still capable of tying his own shoelaces or whatever. They can still walk to shops and buy food. He could probably do his tax return, or they might be a bit rubbish at it, but they're not. It is not like an AI that's just simply incapable. If you asked AlphaZero to do a tax return, it wouldn't understand the question. It's just an outside context problem, right? So I think it is worth separating that the idea of narrowness between those two things. And then I will say, you get people who are amazingly in depth on one thing, and then you get people like me who I speak to experts on different subjects every week, and I become, in inverted commas, very much inverted commas, expert in that topic for a day and can translate it into, but I get this shallow knowledge in which I can sort of understand it in terms of metaphors, and I can understand it in terms of sort of analogies to other things, and can to a level where I can explain it to other people, but I do not have a depth of knowledge. So I think rather than, whereas the people who are brilliant at some topic, they'll understand the maths of it, they'll understand the sort of the deep connections, and I can't compete with that. So there is a breadth versus depth issue there, So I agree there is a nerd stereotype of the guy who can only who can solve all the equations, or solve relativity equations, but can't remember to feed himself, or doesn't know how to feed himself, that sort of thing. And that is real. A part of that is about the sort of person who dedicates themselves to one topic and becomes obsessed with it and learns it inside out, whereas opposed to someone like me who's a bit of an intellectual butterfly and likes to find out one thing one day and then, okay, I've done that now, I'll move on to something else, great, and then I'll go back to that later maybe, and I'll be able to remember some of it, and I'll have this sort of shallow knowledge of a whole wide area of topics. But asked me to do the equations of solving even Newtonian physics, I would run aground in seconds. So I think yes, there is narrowness, but there's also it's narrow but deep often, and that is a distinction worth making. I can understand people feeling that like people are these ultra logical, nerdy, rationalisty type people involved in AI will build AIs in their own image. I suspect that it's kind of putting the cart before the horse there, or getting the problem the wrong way around, because I think from the inside it feels like recognizing human faces or navigating social situations is easy, and doing maths and playing chess is hard. That those are the that actually is the way of it, and that the complex. But actually, if you're programming an AI, it's much harder to understand social nuances, and it's much harder to get it to recognize human faces than it is to get it to do maths equations. And so actually, just by the nature of how certainly how AI and how intelligence and programming works, it is easier to solve those nerdy problems than it is the more sort of to us natural seeming social ones. It's not that if non-nerds had started making AI, then they'd have solved all the how to solve social situations first. It's that solving stuff that feels natural to humans, like social stuff, is really, really hard when you're dealing with maths and programming, and we have to solve the stuff that seems hard to us but is actually easier for AIs, like maths and chess. Then it's not that the nerds are building AI in their own image. It's that AI is the nerdy stuff is easier for AIs to begin with. Google Glass was an example of them sort of going wrong, although they're now doing them again with Ray-Bans, aren't they? Facebook ones. So who knows, right? But also, I thought, who needs an iPad? Like, I've got and then I thought, who needs a smartwatch? And then everyone gets. I have two iPads, one for each of my kids, right? And I have they're getting a bit old now, but I still have them. That's not the AI side, is it? That's the product design area. And I think certainly in Apple, there are a lot of really, really clever people who've got that more arty or more human oriented brain that can work out, well, what do humans actually want at this stage, rather than trying to think Spock-like about what the ideal rational being would want.
4. Subjective experience of your own intelligence.
Oh God, I don't know. There's different kinds, aren't there? There's sort of effortful thinking, where you have to I'm trying to work out this, and I'll sit there with a pen and try and work out, like, oh God, Bayes' theorem or something like that, to try, like, okay, I need to do 10,000 people you test, and 5,000 of them got the disease, and your test is 87% specific, and 80, and you work it through the real system 2 stuff, and that's slow and painful. And then I tell you when I think that the thinking feels most fluid in terms of things I'm actually thinking about, as opposed to, like when I paint little Warhammer miniatures sometimes, and that feels very flow-like. You're just sort of, I can just become sort of Zen-like thing where you're in the moment and doing it, but that's not really thought, is it? That feels like I don't know, but I suppose it is that is just, but then it feels like the sort of frontal lobes of your brain, to be really unscientific about it, sort of switched off, and they can listen to a podcast and they can do what they like, while my hands and sort of more instinctive parts of me just sort of move very naturally. But then there's something a bit like that there's sort of a bit like both when I'm writing, and quite often when you're writing, there's this sort of, I need to say something, and you're sort of like, I need to get from this idea to this idea, and I need a bridge to get from point A to point B, or point A to point C, I suppose. And then it clicks. Oh, right, okay, I need to say this. So this will fit there. And then it just flows off the thing, because I can type as fast as I can think, pretty much. So when I actually know what I want to say, it's good, and it comes out in a few moments, and that's a really nice feeling for a few minutes. Then you bump into the next obstacle, or oh God, now I need to go. So I'm claiming this, but is this thing I'm about to claim actually true? And you go off and you check it, and you go through, and oh God, but I just chosen the first thing that supports my point, so go and check it a bit more, and try and stress test it a bit, and that's all slow and effortful.
5. What makes humans intelligent beyond other animals?
So the obvious answer is they're better at, we've defined intelligence earlier, and humans have more of it, right? They're better at solving problems. They are better at navigating the world. The chimpanzee is better than the lemur or the mouse at solving complex problems. The other answer is our cognitive framework. You can look at things humans do, and they have more widespread tool use, and they have larger, more complex societies, and they build more things than any other species.
6. How relevant is the body?
So I was reading Anil Seth's book called Being You, and other scientists have said that the embodiment of human intelligence is absolutely vital. The reasoning he gives for it, but sort of, and I've heard other scientists say this as well before, that it wouldn't make sense to talk of a human intelligence outside of a body to some degree. Something that AI is only just waking up to is that a lot of the kind of computational work in human intelligence and in lots of animal intelligence is done outside the brain. So, but they said that the shape of the human external ear channels the sound waves in such a way as to essentially perform a Fourier transform on the sound waves. There was another one saying that the goat's hoof does a lot of the work of, working out how you could either calculate how best to sort of position your feet using a central processing system, or you could have hooves that sort of react dynamically to how the floor works without having to do any processing. It's a physical object that does the processing for you. A physical example: the old British space rocket Black Arrow, its guidance system was based on, if its gyroscopes noticed that it was heading off true, they were attached to gyroscopes and it just pivoted the nozzles a different direction. There's no electronics in it anywhere. The fact that AIs, as we build them, won't have human bodies will make them be one of many reasons why they're extremely different from human intelligence.
7. How can I tell someone is intelligent and not faking it?
It's really hard, because by the nature of the thing, if you're not an expert in something, it's very hard to know what questions. I think to ask, a really strong way is to ask them to make predictions. If you are an expert in something, then to some degree you should be able to predict how that thing will behave. If you are an expert in the economy and you say, I think the inflation is too low or something, and if inflation goes up, then GDP will go up, then you make that prediction. And if you are right, that boosts my confidence that you are a real expert who knows what they're talking about. And if you are wrong, then it reduces it. And you might, you won't be right every time. And ideally you make lots of predictions. But if your work doesn't make any predictions, often it's just sort of seems to me, maybe it's me not understanding it, but it seems to me just sort of putting words together in complex sounding ways without ever actually nailing yourself to a specific thing that's either true or not. And I think that a lot of that can be a sort of pseudo expert thing. Someone says homeopathy makes you better. I was like, okay, if homeopathy makes you better, you should predict that people will get better on homeopathy than they do on placebo. Let's tie you to that. And they say, oh well, it doesn't. You can't make predictions like that. Doesn't work. And so I think that when you're shying away from making confident predictions about the future, that's a good test for expert versus non-expert. If you can predict how your changes will will change its behavior, then to some non-trivial degree you've proved that you understand it. I think it's absolutely vital that we have some understanding of what's going on, because otherwise you're going to be unleashing these highly complicated neural nets into really important, running our energy systems or our parole systems, or and all these things, and just say, well, it seems like it works, so let's just go with it, and that is not going to be good enough. So yeah, some sort of level of understanding of provably beneficial systems seems really important to me.
8. How can humans increase their intelligence?
So obviously you take brain force pills available to, so I don't know. Obviously humans can increase their intelligence. Education is a thing. I think there are quite hard limits on how much you can improve them, and a lot of it is, whether we like it or not, a lot of it is genetic. There are hard limits on how intelligent we can make ourselves, driven by the architecture of our brain. But there are things you can do to make yourself better at stuff. Sorry to keep coming back to predictions, but I think it's a really useful thing, which I've been trying to do and not doing enough of, is making falsifiable predictions with confidence interval, with levels of confidence, and seeing how you do and then trying to do better at it. I have been extremely rubbish at actually going back and checking them, but that's mainly because my predictions are so rubbish that they're all wrong, and it's kind of embarrassing. Because that is quantifiable, it's a good way of showing you how, whether you're actually making progress in things, and it forces you to make reckonings with the fact that you're often wrong. I think the greatest thing you can do to improve your intelligence is to be around people who reward it. I think I don't know if you know the rationalist community all that well, but I think it is marvelous for exactly that. You are rewarded socially for visibly updating, for changing your mind on things and saying, I have new evidence and I'll change my mind. It is not that, oh, it's a U-turn, oh, you flip-flopped, oh, you said that, but now you say this, so you must have been wrong then. The point is you have new information and you've changed your mind on, the facts have changed, so I changed my mind. What do you do, sir? And I think if you surround yourself with a social group that rewards that then it trains you to do it, as opposed to being around people who will criticize you for being wrong. Obviously, I'm not telling everyone to go and get new friends, because everyone's friends are there for, but in online life particularly, I think it is good to be around people who give you social reward and positive social feedback for trying to improve the things you believe, trying to optimize the things that you believe towards truthful things, as opposed to believing things that are politically convenient. If someone has a good time at school, they'll do more. They'll be encouraged by it. And there's in certain schools, certainly in my school when I was growing up, knowing things wasn't cool, and that was always. Also, then there's an opposite problem. If you're getting your ego stoked by being right about stuff, then you won't want to be wrong, and so you want to test it. So I wouldn't know what the up to, but yes, I do think that you do want to sort of separate your ego as much as possible from believing true things, and instead put it into trying to find out true things. I think that would be the way I'd want to do it.
9. Positive impact of artificial intelligence.
Huge. Like DeepMind and the protein folding, I think, is an enormous big deal. I think the line between someone doing loads and loads of statistical regressions on gigantic data sets and machine learning is fuzzy, and when does one become the other? But if you run genome-wide association studies and studies on looking at any number of huge biological data sets, then you can detect, you get people are detecting strange new connections between genotypes and phenotypes. And that leads to new treatments. And AI is now becoming this system for sort of generating hypotheses in science. In my day-to-day life, my spam folder is full of junk that I don't want to read, and very rarely gets stuff that I don't want in there.
10. Negative impact of artificial intelligence.
Everyone points to filter bubbles caused by social media prediction algorithms, and I think they're real. There's a sort of real need to talk about them as though AI algorithms are all biased and algorithms are racist and evolved. Yes, but compared to what, right? Compared to humans, humans are a lot more biased. Humans are kind of racist, and I think you can easily point to an AI not being perfectly egalitarian. They're also adjustable. It's much easier to make an AI, to reweight an AI, to reweight it so that it's more likely to hire black people or women than it is to get a human to do that, because humans are complex and have weird stuff going on in the backs of our heads, and we don't know what it is. We should be much more aware of how useful AI can be in these sort of things. I do think there's a problem when it was privately owned and you can't see what's going on, and there's some parole. So it's running a parole board or something like that, parole decisions, and you can't see what its decisions are being made on. But broadly speaking, a world in which AIs are making the decision will be less racist, less sexist, probably, than one in which humans are, because humans are really biased and hard to reprogram. It's not a criticism. It's just people, right? You don't want to look silly and say, well, this thing we're about to do might destroy the world, and your companies are competing with other companies, and there's presumably a big reward for the person who builds the first one, right, of whatever kind. Let's imagine we're talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence here, but whatever new toy we're talking about, and that's probably the big one. If there are safety concerns about it, and actually what you should do is take 6 months of, you build your thing, and then you should take 6 months really kicking the tires to make sure it's safe. But if you do that, that the guys down the road will get there first, or you think it's a very real chance, then you might start cutting corners, and that's totally understandable. And it's exactly, it becomes an arms race, and the thing about an arms race is it's a race. So people cut corners, and they work as hard as they can, work as fast as they can, and some of the things that get cut will be safety issues. Yeah, I don't trust any human to ignore short-term incentives and social pressure and the need to focus on the problem in front of you, rather than some global good that will be manifested in 20 years' time or anything like that. 11.
Natural and artificial intelligence by 2050.
I don't think humans will change very much. What does it matter what I think? I'm sorry, I know that's a silly thing to say, but I'm trying to work out whether I suppose what I'm doing is I'm basing it on those surveys of AI researchers that Bostrom, Katja, Grace did, and people, and they said that they think it's 90% likely by 2075 on average. So I would just have to go with that. And then actually, no, I would bump it a little bit more, because I think there's a tendency within a field to overestimate how far along you are, and the obstacles still seem significant. If it reaches that point that a GPT-3 can predict what I'm doing, or GPT-5 or GPT-7 can predict what I'm going to write better than I can, that seems like me out of a job, to be honest. I love transcription software and things like that. I think they're really useful for long interviews. So I guess there may be ways in which the tools make my job easier without fully replacing me. I don't know. I hope I will have given my kids the tools to navigate the world as best I can. And on the subject of AI, I think I've done a reasonable job of trying to say, look, here are things that it's not silly to be scared about, but also here are the odds that it is a real likelihood.
12. What would you suggest me to better understand humans?
For an AI, there'll be a lot to understand humans in the form of gigantic data sets of human interaction available through social media, public social media. I think the one problem is if you studied, and it sounds like I'm making a joke, but I'm not exactly, or sort of am. If you gave an AI to study Twitter, unless you were quite careful in how you did it, you'd end up training an AI to have a series of personality disorders. Twitter rewards behavior which is not rewarded in normal human social life, and does reward people who are genuinely quite damaging in some respects, or damaged.
Thank you for your collaboration. Goodbye.